I'm not sure if this counts, but it was a beautiful moment that happened last year, and I wanted to share it. Could be coincidental, but I found it comforting to know that he was at peace, and he got his wish for snow in rural Alabama, and lots of it. Bear with me, because there's some backstory to this. My great-uncle Jill was a retired veteran and firefighter. I didn't know much about him, but I know that he was a very sweet man with a big heart and even bigger anxiety. Our family on his side, however, isn't all that way, and unfortunately, he usually went to the brother and sister suppers essentially alone. The only one who would make a concerted effort to talk with him being my grandmother. The family is very, let's say, catty. I think that's a good descriptor. They talk behind one another's back and try to start things. Word got around eventually, and my grandmother was fed up with it. She decided that she wouldn't go to the brother and sister suppers anymore. Well, once Jill found out about this, he decided he wouldn't either. Unfortunately, this meant that he would be alone on Thanksgiving, aside from his caretaker. He usually was anyway, but now, more so. So, my grandmother invited him to our Thanksgiving so that he could have supper like a real family should, around people who do genuinely love and cherish him. I didn't see him for a moment where he wasn't smiling, especially when he was holding my baby niece in his arms, rocking her to sleep when she was fussing for most of Thanksgiving. I got to finally know him then, and I've never met someone with a gentler heart since. When it was over, my grandma told me that Jill told her that he didn't want to leave, that he had such a good time and really didn't want it to be over. He passed away in his sleep just a week later. I'm really, truly happy he had such a nice time before he passed. Now, I live in Alabama, and one thing you should note about here, even in the northernmost part of the state, it rarely snows. On Thanksgiving, it was hardly even weather enough for an overshirt, and the day before Jill was buried, that was still the case. The day of, though, I had never seen it snow harder. I think it may have been at least 3 inches deep, which is unheard of where we live, especially to occur overnight and with no warning. Hell, I'd never seen so much snow stuck on the ground. I know it may just be coincidence, but I like to imagine that was Jill telling us from beyond that he was at peace. Until about 4 months ago, I worked at a place where I was there from about 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. The usual was to work in teams of 2, but I preferred working alone. Yeah, obviously a bad idea. So this building was disconnected from every other building. The rooms were all connected by a hallway in the middle. And every room also had an extra door that either led to a neighbouring room or outside. Nobody liked going in there at all, even in teams. You would go in and feel enough heaviness and angry vibes to kill a honey badger. So of course, I was usually thrown in as the minority vote. So one day I go in and start doing my thing, talking as I go along and describing what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how long it will take, as if it makes the building feel calmer and less angry, as if it's listening to what I'm saying and deciding to hear me out. Anyways, I feel the normal weight on my shoulders, the heat of anger on my back, and the feeling of being watched. All of a sudden, I get the biggest feeling of dread, like something wants me out, and my body wants out, because something real bad is going to happen if I don't. Unfortunately, I'm an idiot, so I ignore it and just continue with what I'm doing. After about 5 minutes of feeling like I'm about to get my kidneys yoinked, I hear footsteps at the end of the hall and absolute chaos. Things breaking, doors getting messed with, clattering, and just your average, you're about to get bit by a ghost noises. So I ran out of there and fetched one of the teams to help me finish the job. And maybe I could use them as a meat shield. I don't know what kind of ghosty boy is possessing that place, but they wanted a breeze flowing and had made a disdain for any throwable things like paper, keyboards, chairs, computer parts that were already scattered everywhere. But now it was just ridiculous. I know that this isn't as spooky as most stories here, but I truly will never forget that day that I had to apologise to 20 people because I pissed off a ghost and the majority of their work got destroyed or lost. Recently, my stepdad passed away. The day after we found him, we had plans to meet with a funeral home to make arrangements for him. While getting ready, I was in my bedroom and caught the lingering smell of him. Not just his cologne. I could identify it immediately and quickly walked out of my room. Having second thoughts, I went back into the room and could no longer smell it. This had happened a few times in odd places, usually while I'm executing tasks related to putting him to rest or taking care of his last wishes. Another strange occurrence I experienced was at his apartment. I had just arrived and had gone into his bedroom closet to pick out an old white shirt to wear while I cleaned. While in the closet, I heard a sudden rhythmic tapping. I poked my head out of the closet and saw his bedroom door slightly swinging back and forth, enough to tap the wall behind it. This was in a fashion that was consistent with it being manipulated, consistent and unchanging in speed of force. I had to reach out and grab the door to stop it. I've been in his apartment several times since he passed away. This was the first time I was there alone, and the only time I've witnessed that door move in that manner. I tried to replicate it by walking quickly past the door, lightly bumping it when walking past, and turning on the heat on a fan to see if blowing would cause the door to move, without success. I want to believe that this is him letting me know he's around, but remaining skeptical. My mum and I have both made a habit of talking to him while we clean or are in the apartment, cracking jokes at him like he would in life. Specifically, we would make a note of asking him to help us find things, such as the key to his gun safe so he can give his firearms to his nephew, per his will. My intuition has never been wrong, even since I was a kid. I always knew when someone was lying, when something was wrong, and I could even explain concepts that I never researched because I thought it was just common sense. But there are 3 recent instances that made me think about talking to somebody, and I want to know if y'all think it's worth it. Boy band BTS announced a break from group activities earlier this year and had a concert in October. I immediately felt something was wrong and documented it on Snapchat with the caption, 12:58 a.m, October 8th, 2022. I just got a bad feeling about BTS, trying to see if I'm a witch. I was kind of joking about the witch thing, but I was genuinely curious if I was overthinking stuff. A week later, they announced that they were all going to the military and would return in 2025. If you don't know, South Korean men must enlist in the military before they turn 30, and their oldest member turns 30 next month. It was a whole ordeal, but no one thought they were going to go. But I just felt it in my bones that something was up, and I was right. I was on chat roulette with a friend and the guy we were talking to said his wife was African. I said aloud, "She's Moroccan." I don't know why, but Moroccan just came to me. My friend asked me what ethnicity she was, and he said Moroccan. She looked at me, and we literally both started screaming. We screamed because not only was I right, but it wasn't my first time doing something like that. She has always joked that I could be a witch. I was on chat roulette again with 2 other friends a day or so later. This Somalian guy came up and we all introduced ourselves. I got a bad feeling for some reason and became disinterested really fast. I asked my friend, "Does he seem like one of those Africans that bash black Americans for saying we're from America and not a country in Africa?" My friend said, "What? No, he seems nice." They continue talking to him, but I get on my phone and wait out the conversation. He then starts, 1, ignoring my African American friend, and 2, bashing my Ethiopian friend for not being a real African and not knowing her heritage because she was born in America, not Ethiopia. She immediately skips him and both of them look at me with wide eyes. I called it. What do you guys think? Lucky guesses? Strong intuition? Or more? Ever since I was very young, I've had these, for lack of a better word, I'll call them visions. They always start the same. I begin to feel this sense of epiphany, as if I'm incredibly close to finding some fundamental truth about the universe. But this excitement is soon overshadowed by an awful, nameless fear, until suddenly, something changes. I see this image in my mind's eye, one that's haunted me all my life. An endless plain of dust, as far as the eye can see, under a sickly sky. Breaking the horizon, there's a cluster of imposing black monoliths, connected by a forest of black wires. The world is silent, except for the humming of wires and the howl of wind through the monoliths, which has always sounded like singing to me. I'm overcome with this inexplicable terror, which breaks the image and pulls me out. After they end, I never remember what caused me to have that revelation in the first place, but I'm left with this strange sense of sudden understanding. For a long time, I've been content to dismiss this as overactive childhood imagination. However, as I've grown up, these experiences have continued, each leaving me with some strange piece of knowledge. Then I began seeing small but noticeable pieces of what world I saw reflected in the works of others, seeming too specific to be coincidental. Cities of black monoliths, nests of humming wires, even a story which described a dead clockwork world. A lot more of these exist, but they're too difficult to explain from the limited summary here. What really prompted me to try and learn more was when I was talking to a friend and discovered he had dreamed of the exact same place. I had never once talked about this with him before, or even mentioned similar ideas. It was just the exact same world, down to even the sound and emotions associated. He described it as fear of a concept. This mystery has haunted me my entire life, and I'm looking for answers. Is there anyone out there with similar experiences? Most reading this will see it as nonsense, but if you've seen the City of Wires, you'll understand. The 3 occurrences occurred within hours of each other in the fall of 2017, shortly after my father passed away after a long battle with cancer. I was 23 at the time. He fought this disease for around 16 years, but eventually lost. He was a smart and funny person, but also quite the micromanager, and at times, petty. He would be the type of father who's clever enough to know if you've been smoking pot or getting into benders with your friends, even if you thought you could hide it from him. My father wasn't the nicest person to be around at the end of his life. My mother did her best to provide for him, but he felt that it wasn't enough. He passed away in our house one grey October morning. After the body was removed, we tried to tidy his belongings the best we could and console each other. The next afternoon was when the occurrences began. I'll list these out in chronological order. 1. My father loved his Amazon Alexa. My mother, brother and I didn't really care for it. My mother was crying on the couch, lamenting that she failed to keep my dad alive and that she could have done more for him. From my point of view, she went above and beyond to help my father, even when his behaviour towards her borderlined verbal abuse. I had my arms around her and told her, "Mom, you did more than enough." Then Alexa lit up and responded, "I don't think so. I don't think so." Usually, Alexa would only respond if called. Also, if she didn't understand your question, she'd respond, "I didn't quite catch that," or, "Could you repeat that?" My mother and I looked at each other and she gently laughed. "See, even your dad thinks so." 2. I smoked weed at the time. My father didn't like this and especially hated it when I smoked in the house. I was smoking weed in the bathroom while my brother was brushing his teeth next to me. My mother was across the house in her room. I was being careful and was blowing the smoke out of the window. My brother didn't smoke at the time, so he just tended to brush his teeth. All of a sudden, a series of loud knocks rang on the bathroom door. My mother shouted, "What's going on in there? Are you smoking weed?" She opened the door and I was busted. I asked her how she knew. She pointed at an old alarm clock we kept plugged in the corner and said that machine was blaring like crazy. Weird. I didn't hear a single thing. And the clock was about 10 feet away from the bathroom door. Moreover, we recently had a mild electrical blackout and didn't bother to reset the time. So the clock was just idly blinking midnight. I wouldn't expect a clock in this state to trigger an alarm. 3. The Wi-Fi failed that same night. I heard my mom call to me and my brother from across the house. "Boys, is your Wi-Fi also down?" We checked and sure enough, the Wi-Fi logo on our phone was gone and we were using LTE. No problem, we'll just go to settings and reconnect. Invalid password. This is weird. We had the same password for family years and never had this happen. The password was our last name, family. So for example, Forster family. Of course, Forster was my father's surname. Seems like my dad took a surname away from us. There was no way to fix the issue, so we eventually changed our password to our dogs' names. I'm still not sure how much I believe that ghosts are real, even though some things have happened before. However, recently, I started to have this weird dream. It's hard to explain this feeling, but it's not a normal dream. It doesn't feel like lucid dreaming or sleep paralysis, and I am healthy. There's nothing physical or mentally wrong with me. This summer, I was staying with my friends at a holiday apartment. Immediately, some rooms just felt wrong. Something made me stare into a few corners or places, but I didn't really care. Before we went to sleep, the lights started flickering. The switch was making sounds, but we were like, okay. The night, I also woke up and saw a smoky black figure standing next to me, trying to touch me. Well, when it almost reached my body, it started to pulse with energy, started to get really hot, and everything was tingling. Then it was released in waves. and the figure went away. In the morning, and also the following days, I felt full of energy, slept like a baby. Can't say that about my friends. Now, I will get fast with the next incident. The same thing happened at my home, but now the waves were much stronger and more controlled. I felt the same. At both times, my watch showed weird activity in terms of heart rate and sleep. I'm not sure how to feel about this. It feels way too crazy for me, but on the other hand, it felt too real. Any ideas? I've been living at my house since I was born. 7 years back, we constructed a new outhouse with minimal furniture, which is approximately 20 metres away from the main home. Since construction, I have used the outhouse more than any of my other family members to study and attend online lectures to avoid getting distracted. But ever since 2021, I have witnessed subtle oddities during my time there. In January 2021, the wall clock suddenly stopped at around 4:20. My mum and I changed the batteries, and it started working. The next day, it stopped at about 4 again. So I bought a new clock with new batteries and hung it on the wall. It worked well for a couple of days, but stopped working again. Frustrated, we bought one more clock, inserted new batteries, worked for a couple of days, and it stopped again at 4:10. All 3 clocks stopped are still in the new house. We gave up, and since 2021, there have been no working clocks in the house. It almost feels like time doesn't exist when I enter the house to do my tasks, whereas the clocks in the main house work. As usual, there are no issues there. Although we found it strange, my family did not think much about the incident and went ahead with our life. I did some Googling to find the spiritual meaning behind stopping clocks, especially around 4, but nothing turned out. I moved away from my house to pursue higher studies in a different city and returned in August 2022. I started using the outhouse again for studying and preparing for my exams. As I finished my tasks for the day, I went ahead to turn off the lights, and suddenly I felt a slight tap on my upper arm. I completely lost my balance and hit myself against the wall. Again, I thought to myself it must have been me being clumsy or drowsy, and went back to the main house to sleep. But the incident that happened 2 days ago drove me to post. I finished studying around 10 p.m. at night. I turned off the lights, and just before I stepped outside the door to lock it, I felt someone or something whisper in my ear. Although I didn't see anything visually, it sounded gibberish, and the thing whooshed past me. I felt a sudden waft across my face. I rushed outside, locked the door, and went back to the main house to sleep. I did not discuss the incident with my family members, because I would definitely get laughed at or said that it's all in my head. I don't understand what I've been experiencing. Is this a haunting that I should be aware of, or a spiritual existence? Or am I just overthinking? A member of my family is a diplomat who got stationed in Japan, so my whole family moved there when I was 6. We lived in the Czech embassy in Japan for 4 years, and some crazy shit apparently happened. The most important thing was when an older member of my family had a sleepover in the embassy cinema with a couple of his Japanese friends. They had sleeping bags and pillows, which they put in between the seats in the back row. The older member of my family woke up at around 2 a.m. to a plant in the corner of the cinema, right next to a wall, shaking rapidly. Now, they have a lot of sleep paralysis, so they didn't think that much of it, until they noticed his Japanese friend shaking, looking down and muttering something. When he got her attention, she told them, "Don't look at it. They will want you to help them." After some time, it stopped, and they booked it out of there. Another instance is the receptionists and such often saw the cupboard start opening and closing rapidly with a bang. I never knew about this until a year ago or so. I have this thing that happens to me rarely, but it's been going on through my whole life. Sometimes I get this feeling inside of me that tells me that everything will work out in a way. It's super hard to explain what the feeling is exactly, but it feels almost supernatural. And when I get this feeling, everything actually has worked out, even though it's an extremely small percentage chance it will happen. And I only get this feeling when it's important stuff. Not like winning the lottery, but stuff that actually matters. And now I recently got dumped by the girl of my dreams. And I got this super weird, almost supernatural feeling again, telling me it will be us, but not right now. My family has been shaking their heads, smiling when this kind of stuff happens to me, and telling them I'm extremely lucky. But I don't know. Is it luck? Because it's almost like I know it beforehand. I'm not religious at all, but I heard someone tell me that I have a guardian angel. This happened 3 years ago, when I was still in high school. My school is very far from my home, so I ride the train. Sometimes a friend would go with me. We would usually encounter our classmates along with her boyfriend in front of us. We never really spoke with each other, but we know it's them because of their size differences, her height. Our classmate is a girl and she's very small, smaller than the average height. I think she's around my chest level and I'm just around 156 centimeters. She also has curly hair, which is rare in my country. Her boyfriend is tall and big. My friend and I would always try and walk past them on the way to the train. We never greet them because we're too shy. One day, we had a group project over at another classmate's house. That girl classmate was also invited. We started getting to know each other, and she told me that she thinks I'm cool and wants to be friends with me, and that she would always see me entering the school at around 9 a.m, but she's too shy to approach me. I went silent, because as far as I know, I'm always late for class. I would never be at the school at around 12 to 12:30, never too early. I told her that it wasn't me, but she told me that it really was me. She told me the details of how I would get off my ride and cross the highway running like a penguin. Well, she's actually right. Everyone tells me that I ran like a penguin when I have a backpack on me. She continued explaining. I wore a blue hoodie, black and yellow Adidas bag, and huge black headphones, so it would be easy to identify me. Our country has a lot of hot weather, and no one would wear stupid hoodies during daytime, except me. I then told her about how my friend and I also saw her and her boyfriend after school, on the way to the train station. She looked at me weirdly and told us that it wasn't them, and that they actually go the opposite way. They don't have anything to do on the way to the train station. Chills. I defended what I said and told her that it's them. I know that her boyfriend wears white glasses, and that's also rare because I haven't seen a guy at our school who wears the same glasses. We started exchanging weird looks, and I asked her if she's messing with me. She then texted her boyfriend and asked him about how she would always point out to him that she sees me during 9 a.m. entering the school grounds. She asked her boyfriend what I wore, and he explained clearly. Blue hoodie, black headphones, black and yellow bag, running like a penguin across the street. So, they would see me at 9 a.m. entering the school, and I would see them walking to the train station at around 7 p.m. It doesn't make sense. After our conversation happened, those never showed up again. I still think about that incident every day after years. It was a bizarre situation. It continued to happen until we noticed it. It just stopped after we found out about it. I've been with different classmates on the way to the train, so I have other witnesses. We never know why it happened. Was it doppelgangers? What would have happened to us if we approached those things? Think we were lucky that we didn't approach them. Who knows what those things are? I live in a town in the Texas Panhandle that sat right on Route 66. One of the oldest buildings in the city is a Route 66 landmark, the Nat. It's home to multiple antique stores now, but before that it was a venue with a little side building connected to it that served as a bookstore. I moved back here from Albuquerque to Amarillo in 2008. I'd gotten into belly dancing and wanted to join a group here. I found one, reached out and asked about joining. They invited me out to a practice with them to see how we all got along. I met them at the Nat on Thursday. It was already getting dark, maybe 7 or 8 p.m. We all parked on a little island across from the building, and I followed them to where we entered through the bookstore. The place was closed, but the leader of the group, who I'll call B, had keys to get in, since they used it for practice. As B unlocked the door, I could hear and see the women getting nervous. Some of them had little necklaces with mojo satchels. Then they held each other's hands in a human daisy chain as they filed through the open door. I was pretty confused, so I just held on to the girl in front of me and made sure to keep pace as we jogged through the dark bookstore. I remember thinking that I had been in that building a million times and there was nothing to be scared of. And then I felt it. I felt something in the dark behind me. We had reached the doorway for a narrow corridor that connected the ballroom and bookstore. As I crossed the threshold, I looked back over my shoulder and I saw it. It's difficult to explain because I saw it more in my mind's eye than I did my actual eye. I visually and mentally saw something there behind me. Whatever was there was not of this earth. It was dark and it was bad. But then B shut the connecting doors and it was out of sight, at least. I didn't know what to make of it, so I ignored it. In the ballroom, we warmed up and started dancing. I have long hair, well past my shoulders, and I wear it down often. With that said, something was pulling my hair as I danced. I could see and feel my hair being tugged with every spin I took. But no one was there. The tugging didn't feel malicious. The bookstore did. There were cupboards in the front portion of the building. They began to open and close on their own. I saw that happen myself out of the corner of my eye. B looked at me and the group had said, "The cupboards are freaking me out." And we ended practice early, exiting the building through the front doors, thankfully. We went to a coffee shop that was right by Nat. I bought my drink and sat down with the group and hit a brick wall. Every single bit of energy was suddenly drained out of me. I didn't feel sick, but I felt drained of life. I told the group I needed to go. When I got home, I slept for 24 hours. I told B that I wouldn't be able to be a part of the group. She understood. I've been to many shows at the Nat before and after that night. Never had any further experiences, but I did see someone else have an experience. A year ago, after about a decade of wondering what the hell happened that night, I reached out to B to see if she could confirm my timeline of events. She did, and then some. Not only did she confirm every detail of that evening, she confirmed that there were reports of a dark entity in the bookstore. She also mentioned the possibility of a demonic entity towards the back of the stage. She reminded me of another incident that happened that was odd. A year or so after my eventful evening, the dance troupe performed at an event at the Nat. One of the other girls, not B, in the middle of their performance, suddenly yanked back and slammed down to the floor. She had to be carried off the stage by several people and taken to the hospital, where she was told she had broken her leg. According to B, the doctor was puzzled, as the way she had broken her leg was not often seen in a simple fall, but rather from forcible impact. The girl who broke her leg was adamant that something had grabbed her and slammed her to the floor. There's a lot about human physics that I don't understand. So I would be a little more skeptical about having one's leg broken by an invisible force. Except, I saw it happen with my own eyes. When that girl fell, she didn't slip or stumble. She was mid-dance, not even a turn or anything that would throw her off balance. Her weight was on both feet, and then suddenly, she wasn't. And the impact of her fall was loud. Take it as you will. November 13th, 2011 is when my mum went crazy. My parents were married for 21 years. My mum has always had her demons, but for a long time, she at least tried. Sometime in 2006 or 2007, after I went off to college, she went off her meds for depression for the millionth time. This time was different. I didn't realise what mania looked like at the time. I was only 18. But in the years later, I realised she had an adult onset of bipolar disorder. It was unnerving. It was the last straw for my dad, and he left. The divorce was finalised in 2008. My mum was never the same. The combination of borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder meant watching her go up and down on a haunting roller coaster of destruction, meant watching the small part of her that was a mother fade away. My dad left her the house, the one we had lived in all my life. It's a beautiful home, cosy and on the corner. There's a big window and natural light. It always felt like home until the divorce. I hated being in the house after my dad left. Her behaviour became more erratic and the lows became so much lower, and the house began to change. It was dark and stale, and you couldn't wait to leave. I've always chalked it up to my perception as a young adult, weathering a divorce and my mom's downward spiral. But now, I don't know. It got worse and worse over time, and then I got the phone call on November 13th, 2011. I was living in another city. The call was from my father, telling me a neighbour noticed he hadn't seen my dog in the bay window for several days, and decided to use the spare key my mother had given him. The dog was found dead in the bathroom, and my mother in bed, weak and frail. She had laid in the bed for so long, her leg muscles had atrophied. The dog, I've never been able to get answers on, but my sister once let it slip that there was blood. The cleaners my aunt hired to clean the house found my cat 3 days into the job, crushed to death between the ottoman and chair in the black room. She spent the next few years in a catatonic state, first in the mental hospital, and then she was transferred to a nursing home. In the meantime, I was the one to clean up the house. She was a shopaholic hoarder, and mental illness had only amplified it. The first time I came back home, it felt dark and stale, but it was empty. It didn't have the panicked pressure that I had felt with my mother there. I sorted and cleaned, sorted and cleaned, sorted and cleaned. The more I did this, the lighter and brighter it became, until it felt like home again. Not really, but kind of. There was always a little bit of staleness there, but I attributed, and perhaps still do, to my subconscious awareness of what had happened before. One thing I noticed about the house was that the lightness would come dark in the blink of an eye, and everything was gradual, if that makes sense. You never noticed things until you were consumed by the stale darkness. It was like a cloak coming over the place in one steady sweep. It was odd, but how can you explain it? I had a boyfriend. Our relationship wasn't exactly healthy to begin with, but I will say that he noticed the same things. There were 3 specific incidents with that house. First incident. One day, it was me, him, and one of his friends sitting in the middle room when we heard the distinct sound of the front door opening. They went to check, and it was closed, with no sign of being opened. The thing about the doors is that it was like the rest of the house. The door had become difficult to open and close. In order to open it, you had to put your shoulders into it. But in order to close it, you had to thrust your body weight against it several times before it would shut. We heard it open, but we never heard it shut. This was impossible. 3 people heard the exact same thing. The second incident. My ex and I were sitting in the middle room once again. We were in our office chairs at our desks, talking about something, when we distinctly heard several creaks overhead, and a sudden smash directly, and I mean directly over my head, in the attic. It was as if someone took several steps until they were overheard, and then either a plate or a glass bong and threw it with great force. The sound was so incredibly clear. My ex and I locked eyes with each other, and he whispered, "There's someone in the attic." I was gone. I bolted out of the garage and backed my car out and parked in the driveway. My ex came out to meet me and convinced me to stay where I was in the car, as he called his best friend, and asked him to come with his gun so they could search the attic. His best friend arrived in less than 2 minutes with his weapon. The side gate faced the street, and there was a bay window that wrapped around the house and stretched almost to the front door. We still had the blinds up. This meant that from my vantage point, I could see inside half of the house, and if anyone exited through the only 2 exits in the home, I could even see the roof. It was not a large home. I would be able to see if anyone was making an escape. As I waited for the boys to return, I half expected to see a homeless man scrambled out of the house. It was the only thing that could explain the sound of something being thrown right above my head. The boys completed the search of the home. Nothing and no one was to be found. I asked if they checked the attic. Thoroughly, they said. I believed them. The thing about the attic of that house is that it wasn't a true attic. The rafters were set up in such a way that a person could not walk around freely up there. If they did, they would fall through the ceiling. There was a light switch up there, and the boys had examined every square inch of the attic. There was no sign of life to be found. No glass. Nothing. It would be easy to write it off as a strange sound the old house had made, if it wasn't for one thing my boyfriend was insistent upon. The footsteps he heard leading up to the crash. He was adamant. He had heard the footsteps above him as they walked to the spot right above me. He had heard the wood slightly creak as if something had lifted its arms up to throw something with force. I wear hearing aids, so I miss out on a lot of sounds. But I had heard creaking before the smash, and I knew by then when my boyfriend was being sincere. I believe him even to this day as to hearing those footsteps. The third incident. We were in the house for 2 or 3 years. I split my time between there and down south for college. My boyfriend stayed behind in the house. He would mention that there were times he just knew he wasn't alone, but no other specific incidents took place. The house began to get darker. Our fights grew worse and more violent. Something happened to my mind. It all happened gradually until it was horrible. A point of no return. To this day, the depression I felt there is like nothing I have ever experienced before. It changed me. After one particularly savage fight, I went for a drive and came back. I was alone. He wasn't there. I entered through the back door and was greeted by a wall of darkness. It was stale, cold, dark. Even though all the lights were on, you could barely breathe. I snapped. I yelled at the darkness in the kitchen, for no particular reason. Get the fuck out! Go away! I see you! Go! I'm sick of you! It retreated. I swear to you on my son, I visibly saw the darkness shift backwards. I screamed at it some more, and it retreated some more. There was light again. The house was light and beautiful again. My memory stops there. In the kitchen, screaming at the darkness. Then I woke up in my bed, fully clothed, on top of the sheets. The house is dark again. The staleness is there again, but when I walk into the kitchen, it's light and bright. Oddly enough, that was the first time I considered the possibility that there might be something more in the house. That there might be something otherworldly there. But what? Not too long after the incident in the kitchen, I left the house and it was put up for sale. I've been through many tough and trying times since then, but I've never experienced the darkness, the sluggishness, the staleness, the pressure, the panic, the hopelessness, the bleakness, and the agony of that home since then. My gut tells me that there's something there. My rationalism is willing to concede that it could all be subconsciously rooted in the pain associated with the home's history. But I feel that there truly is or was something dark and dangerous within that home. And I only wonder if they were there when my mother moved in with my father, or if she created it with her downward spiral. So today is Sunday, a day I usually go out to hike a route I hiked many, many times. I won't anymore. But I had to think of it today. This experience is roughly 2.5 years old now, and I haven't gone back to my old routine since then. I live in a pretty small rural village in Germany. Less than 200 people live here. Not much around here besides fields, forests, cows, sheep, a donkey, and 2 horses. Directly outside of the house I live in is a road to the right which leads into a field and then into a pretty thick forest. The route I usually take is around 18 kilometers long. It doesn't sound like much, but the route is very rough. It's uphill almost the entire time, and the forest has no roads, so you actually walk through rough terrain with thick tree roots and bushes. Anyway, I walk this exact route 1 to 2 times per week, and usually when it's already dark outside. I wear a headlamp for when it's too cloudy out and the moon isn't nicely visible, so I don't trip or get hurt. Why in the evening night? Because I'm usually on the phone with a good friend talking. We live very far apart. It's day for her when it's night for me. I don't mind, because that way, I don't feel alone hiking. For people who are not familiar with German forests, the most dangerous thing you may encounter is a wild boar, so it's usually pretty safe to just wander around. Almost no walls where I am, and even if, they would be too shy to just show themselves. Bears are not a thing here. Also, no crazy people living inside the forest. The only thing you encounter is the farmer who drives up like 1 or 2 miles into the road to check on his livestock. After that, it's all forests, no fields anymore anyway. Now, to the weird thing I experienced. Headlamp on, AirPods in, talking to my friend, catching up. For the first 5 miles or so, nothing weird happened. I even had the headlamp off, though I wore it on my head. The moon was making enough light, and once your eyes adjust to the dark, you can see quite well, as long as you don't sprint around the forest. Though once, I was in the deeper part of the forest. My AirPods started making weird sounds, almost like it was losing connection, but I could hear her voice still. It was more like a background buzzing. It wasn't actually interfering with my call. This buzzing went on, and after 20 minutes or so, I suddenly noticed that I couldn't see as well anymore as I could. The moon was blocked by clouds, but these clouds didn't look like normal clouds. They looked like thick walls of fog, just way higher up than fog should be. I know it's hard to picture, but clouds usually look fluffy or thinned out. They seem heavy and wet. It's hard to describe. I told my friend to hold on for a minute because I had to focus on something. The thing I had to focus on was a huge, thick, deep black cloud. It kind of pushed itself through the fog like clouds and positioned itself right over me, almost as if it was trying to throw a shadow around an area I was in. The cloud also started to swirl in the middle slightly, and that was when my connection just fell flat. I got the beeping sounds you get when you lose connection, and gone was my phone call. No more bars, no mobile data, nothing. But my AirPods were still buzzing like crazy in my ears. That's when I felt uneasy, neck hair standing up. Cold sweats on my back, and I started turning around to leave. Because the way ahead just seemed a lot more dark and sinister than my way back. The moment I turned around and started, well, slightly jogging back because I felt scared, was when I started to hear bell sounds. Almost like church bells, but the sound was deeper. That typical ring you hear after a bell sound was just stuck in the air, and it was giving me this weird sensation, as if my bones were suddenly rubbing against each other. It was extremely freaky. All I remember is that I started to go from walking back to jogging back to running back, trying to leave the forest and go back to the fields where you start. I didn't look back while running, but I could hear the bell sound getting weaker the further away I got, and the fog-like clouds were becoming less and less until I finally left the forest and I was back to a normal sky. Thin clouds in the moon. Once I got back home, I simply undressed, went into the shower, and went into bed. Thinking I just simply got spooked today, or maybe I was exhausted and my brain went haywire. I don't know, but I never saw a cloud like that in my life, and church bells are not a thing late at night inside a forest. Never went back to hike that route. Never told anyone, because I'm a bit embarrassed, but I had to think of it today. I never really brought this up to many people. I've only ever told some of my friends and my cousin. When I was 5, I experienced constant nightmares and strange activities after the deaths of my baby sister and grandpa. My parents had my baby sister, who sadly passed away 3 days after birth. I only have 3 memories of that time. Me playing in the child area with my grandma, me receiving some dinosaur books to keep me company, and seeing her for the last time before she was taken off life support. I have no other memories of her. Shortly after she died, my grandpa died as well. I actually spent quite some time with him, but oddly enough, don't have that many memories of him. Shortly after both of their deaths, I started to have constant nightmares and what seemed to be sleep paralysis. I would wake up frozen in my bed. Voices would go off in my head, and my bed would start rapidly spinning. The most vivid memory of this would be the strong pain I would feel in my back that seemed like someone was stabbing me. These dreams would progressively get worse, and the pain I'd feel in my back would become more painful. The voices I'd hear became louder, and eventually I'd start to see figures in my room. Strangely enough, I only had one paranormal experience while living in the apartment I was having these dreams in. It was the middle of the night, and my mom was in the kitchen cooking. The way the apartment was laid out had the kitchen next to a long hallway where the bedrooms were located. I was sitting at the end of the hallway, which was right next to where my mom would have been cooking. I was playing with my stuffed dinosaurs and decided to throw one at the end of the hallway. A strange feeling overcame me, and I could do nothing but sit there in silence and stare at the toy I threw. I can vividly remember the toy sitting up and starting moving toward me. I wasn't scared, but knew something wasn't right either. I tried to call out to my mom, but couldn't yell, as it felt like I was out of breath. As the toy neared me, it fell over, and I could feel myself escape the trance I was in. At that point, I felt nothing. I was still not scared and didn't tell my mom about what had happened. This was the only paranormal thing that happened to me at this apartment, other than my reoccurring lifelike nightmares. About a year into this happening to me, we moved to a duplex further into the city we lived in. There was a small break of the nightmares I had, but they reappeared shortly after. Unlike the ones I had at the previous apartment, these were much more violent and lifelike. The nightmares would usually consist of an order like this. I'd wake up frozen, hearing voices and sweating. I would move my eyes around until I noticed a black figure standing in my room. There would be silence until my blanket would be slowly pulled off of me. A feeling of nausea and dizziness would hit me, and then I could finally sit up, and it would stop. This went on for a year with the same pattern. The worst one I had has always stuck with me. Again, the pattern repeated, but it didn't stop once I sat up. This time, when I did sit up, the voices I heard almost sounded like yelling in my head. I became very hot and extremely dizzy and nauseous. While I was on the same floor as my parents, I did not feel an urge to wake them, but rather ran downstairs to the bathroom, where I sat over the toilet as if I was going to vomit. My vision felt static somewhat, and the stabbing feeling in my back was extremely painful. The feeling of static I got was very odd. My vision would seem to get darker, but I could see static, if that makes sense. Imagine your vision seeing those floaties we sometimes see, but they're everywhere you look, and they move around like TV static. That's what I would see. This went on for what felt like an eternity. During this, I could not speak. I felt like someone took my breath and voice and felt helpless. Thankfully, I ended the night falling asleep on the couch, after most likely passing out. The nightmares didn't stop until we eventually moved out again to a house in the woods we rented for a couple of years. I was in the 5th grade by then, and surprisingly never experienced any activities like that again in my life. I would have nightmares every now and then, but they were never as scary as the ones I had previously. I never had any paranormal experiences either. I recently brought this up to my cousin, and he told me he felt odd about both the old apartment and duplex I lived in at the time. He said he always felt like there was a bad presence in those houses, which was why he never spent the night. Around Monday or Tuesday of this week, I was sitting at my desk picking up my PlayStation controller as I had previously set it down. I looked over slightly and saw something that appeared to be a grey, fog-like creature's head that was peeking out from under my desk, that had pitch black where its eyes should be and a long stretched mouth as well. Of course, I reacted like a sane person and yelled and jumped back. My brother asked me what was wrong, and I tried to tell him that I had seen a face, but he didn't believe me. After that, nothing really happened, besides whenever I close my eyes, I see a person burning. I can vividly see them grabbing at their face. It isn't lifelike though, it looks like a drawing. It's been happening every time I close my eyes to sleep. Thursday of this week, I was trying to sleep. I was restless, so I rolled over to see if there was anything going on in my room. And I looked at my door and see a tall, jet black figure who can barely fit in my doorway. The thing was very skinny, and it looked like he was studying me, like I was a creature to be watched in a petting zoo. The creature looked like it was moving its head around, but I couldn't see it well because it didn't have any facial features, and my room was dark. Whenever I saw it, I locked eyes with it for 10 to 15 seconds, and I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The creature started to laugh. Its arms grabbed at its sides as if I was the funniest joke it had ever seen. I turned over and turned back to it, and it was still there. It didn't leave. I yelled at my brother to turn on the lights, but of course I took my eyes off of the thing to look at my brother. But as soon as I turned back to the monster, it had left. I tried to play it off cool and acted like I wanted to go into the closet and change into more comfortable clothes. I did, and then went back to try and sleep. I never looked at the door again that night. I believe that the majority of events that occur can be explained by logical explanations. That was until both myself and my wife had our experiences with several unexplainable events. I want to context that these events have changed both my wife and myself's views on many things, including the paranormal. Events took place around 6 years ago. The wife and I were staying at my father's house after he passed away. Everyone in the family spoke about that house being haunted, as long as I can remember. Personally, I never had anything weird happen prior to this, and overall just chalked it up to that side of my family being overzealous storytellers. We were at the house for around a week to help clean it out, as it was around 6 hours away from where we lived. There were several weird events leading to the final event that changed myself and my wife forever. To give better context, the house itself was a postage stamp style Victorian house with 2 floors and a semi-finished apartment style attic. First event, I was going up into the attic to work on cleaning out some stuff my father had up there. He was an avid collector of NASCAR diecasts and other collectibles, and things were everywhere. On the way up the steps, I was on the phone with my wife, who had gone to get food, when I saw the handle on the attic door twist and the door slightly open. This area we were in was not necessarily dangerous, but was far from nice. I instantly thought someone had broken in and immediately ran up to investigate. I searched everywhere and couldn't find anyone. Second event. Wife, myself, and a childhood friend were in the same attic cleaning out items. In the attic, there was thick old shag carpet that had been there since the 70s. Since it was a semi-finished attic, one room was for storage and is where my buddy was working. I look at my wife, who is literally just pointing at the door. We both watched the door for that room close slowly on my buddy. There was zero reasoning or explanation, as we both saw it, and the door itself took a large amount of force to actually close. Obviously, my buddy was pretty unhappy, and we both just said, "Sorry, forgot you were in there," to avoid him thinking both of us were losing our minds or scared him. Last event. The last night we ever stayed there, we slept on the second floor in the master bedroom. The bedroom itself was positioned so the headrest of the bed's wall was aligned with a set of stairs coming up. The wall and stairs were about 3 to 15 feet difference in height, depending on the location, an important piece to what ended up happening. Throughout the night, my wife kept waking me up to say someone was walking around on the platform landing outside. I looked and did see what looked like a shadow under the door frame, so I immediately opened the door and braced for what I assumed was an intruder. Again, Nothing was there, even after searching the house extensively. Later that night, I awoke to sounds of scratching in the wall behind my head. My wife is awake already and looking at me, oddly terrified, as she hears it too. I assume it's a rat or some type of animal. While weird, it was directly behind me. Would not be a far-fetched possibility, as the house did have critters in it. In a tired rage, I turn around and just punch the wall to scare it off. Within a second, something punches back on the wall with such force it shakes the entire thing. We both then hear footsteps stomping or running away from us and up the attic stairs. At this moment, we're both at a loss for words and immediately pack up with our son and leave. We call the police and just assume it has to be someone who broke in, until the next day when we started to think about it. The area where the scratching was occurring was above the steps, a good 10 feet, and even an extremely tall man would have had trouble reaching with a ladder. However, even if they could reach, what we couldn't explain is how this thing ran on a floor that literally did not exist. The sound of running was not going up steps, but as if there was a hallway or floor directly behind the wall, which there was not. The police found no signs of a break-in or any intruder being there. The security cameras outside never had any alerts or saw anyone coming in. We ended up selling the house as with everything in it and never stayed over there again. I came down briefly a few weeks later to finish up some final business and just went to tell my father goodbye at the house. Upon entering, the house just felt so hateful. I don't understand how a house could have feelings, but if someone was to ask me what I felt, hateful is the word to use. I have no idea to this date what any of it means. To clarify, had I not been in such a state of grief, I would have never investigated nor stayed after the first event. My dad always brushed off the other family members' claims of it being haunted as no big deal. And even in my childhood years visiting, I never once had a weird experience. My dad and I had a good relationship throughout his life, and he never talked about the house in a negative light. How has everyone else coped with a truly unexplainable event? My wife and I still to this day cannot even talk about it without getting chills or feeling literally insane. This personal story is one that happened many years ago, and it's not a fuzzy memory. It's something happened that was clear as day. A glass object exploded before my eyes. So, what happened? Now, to be clear, I do not believe in the paranormal. I'm here because I love reading about spooky things, and I like to see what other people believe about the world. But this was really weird, and I think some folks might have some thoughts on it. I was having lunch in my backyard with my parents and grandparents one summer. Just inside, visible through the glass sliding door, is a buffet table of sandwich stuff, and just outside of that door is the table we were eating at. I'm sitting at the table in a position that is facing the glass door to the inside, and as I start to zone out from the conversations around me, my gaze settles on a small glass bowl of guacamole. A moment passes, and then pop! Glass shards and guac fly all over the table, and the bowl is no more. It was sitting on the table one moment, and the next it exploded just as I stared and zoned out on it. The bowl had not been heat washed prior, nor was it in any way structurally compromised. It was sitting in our cabinet, and then filled about halfway with homemade guac. My dad and I are both scientifically minded atheists. He has a master's in thermodynamics, so he understands heat and what it does to materials. And he assured me that the glass bowl had not gotten hot any time recently. Neither of us could think of an explanation. Pretty creepy. Okay, so this has got to be my biggest fuck this experience of my life. Just imagine what it would have been like. Also, I want to clarify, I don't believe in ghosts, God, or literally anything paranormal. But what happened to me a few days ago has got to be the scariest moment of my life. So I went to bed at about 8:30 on Monday morning, as I was quite tired from a long day. And I woke up in the pitch dark with a really bad dry mouth. So I checked my phone, and it's around 3:20 in the morning, and went downstairs to get some water. I get a drink and go to the toilet, and when I get to my door, I notice it's closed. I would have definitely heard it if it had closed, as it drags along my carpet, which also makes it require some amount of force to open it, which a draft would never even be able to budge. Yet both of my windows and the 2 town bedrooms right next to mine all had their doors closed. But I would hear the slightest movement that somebody made them, never mind them getting up, walking across the room to open the door and close mine, just to close their door again and go back to bed. I really couldn't be fucked though, so I just ignored it, but as I pushed on the door, it doesn't budge. I mean, like, it literally could not move at all. Even though it sits against the carpet, when it's closed, it can still jiggle when the closing mechanism is in the door frame, and there's no carpet underneath it. So something was on the inside. My soul literally left my body at that exact moment. Never have I ever felt just so destroyed that I had to go through something like this. I couldn't sleep downstairs because my phone is in my room and that's my alarm. So I start questioning to wake my parents up. So I poke my head and they're both asleep. So I try the door again and this time it opens fine. Never has it been so hard to sleep in a room, but nothing like that has happened since.